Hello, Adam here. I know it's been a while since I last posted anything here, but I wanted to drop a quick update for where things are at. With that said, let's address the elephant in the room. To put it bluntly, the development of Elysian Ascent stopped somewhere in 2022, and since then I've been cooking up a new game that I feel much more strongly about. But before I go into that, I wanted to do a post-mortem on Elysian Ascent to hopefully clear up why development on that game was so rocky and reflect on some negatives that plagued its development that I can learn from to improve my future projects. For those of you that don't know, a post-mortem is basically sort of like a self-reflection of a project. It's designed to document what exactly went right and wrong during development. For my postmortem, I basically broke it down into 4 sections: an overview, what went right, what went wrong, and then at the end, just a list of changes that I would make for future projects. For the overview, I'd say overall, the project was pretty fun to work on, definitely more at the start, but over time, I lost a lot of that motivation. I really enjoyed working on and engineering new systems and designing levels. Over the course of development, once that stuff became pretty fleshed out, the work on the game overall became kind of boring and I lost motivation pretty fast. Additionally, I'd say that the game loop in retrospective is inherently unfun, with I guess most of the fun coming from the rage of watching your friends mess up on these difficult levels that you create. Because of that, it was also hard for me to test and also to find new playtesters, just because the game doesn't really have a lot of variability, and once you kind of master the movement systems, that's pretty much all there was to the game. But it's definitely not all negatives. There were some new things that I've never done before, such as submitting a build to itch.io, doing Twitch integration, just learning some general platforming principles, some level design. So there definitely were some cool things that I learned over the course of the project, but overall that wasn't really enough to, I'd say, maintain my motivation. I briefly started to touch on this in my last point, but I guess I'll just jump into the what went right section. As mentioned, there were a lot of new things that I had to learn or work on that I've never really done before. Just some things to list that I can think of would include platforming. Never really did any 2D platforming stuff before. Working on a lot of the visual variety things like the day-night system was super fun. Just general UI work. There was level design, that Twitch integration that I mentioned. Also, towards the end of development, I started working on level builder, but I never really got around to finishing that. On top of all that, I built a pretty fun and interesting world to mess around in. This was definitely enhanced by the visuals that was provided by me, by my friends that I was working with at the time. And then on top of that, just completing a viable, good-looking, and relatively bug-free demo that I could submit to itch was a milestone that myself and the team were very proud of. Now on to the what went wrong section. I think the biggest point I want to address for this was that the game was scoped pretty horribly from the start. For those of you that don't know, I first started working on Elysian Ascent during COVID as a solo project when I just had a lot of free time to work on the project. I think because of that, I had just assumed that I'd be able to accomplish a lot more, and so the game had a pretty large scope right from the start. Additionally, the people I was working on the game with at the time were all remote friends that were doing the work as, I guess, a volunteer job. No one was really getting paid to do this. We worked on this because we had a lot of fun working on it. But over time, once we saw that the end of the project was still quite a ways away, I think we all just started to lose motivation relatively quickly. And then once the game stopped being fun, the game just started to feel like work. But it was work that we weren't really being compensated for and we didn't have fun doing. And once you kind of hit that point with a personal project, there's just no reason to continue working on it. And I know a lot of that stuff might sound like a huge bummer, but I definitely learned a lot from this project that I think is applicable to future projects. The first thing I wanted to touch on was that it's super important to keep your game scope manageable. I think starting a game with too big of an idea is just kind of setting yourself up for failure. On top of making sure that your game has a manageable scope from the start, it's also pretty important that you pick a gameplay loop that you think you'll have a lot of fun working on and testing. It was such a huge flaw for Elysian Ascent that the gameplay scope was so huge in tandem with the gameplay loop just being very repetitive and not very replayable. It just led to extreme boredom and fatigue very, very quickly. I think something that could help with this is setting reasonable milestones for the project. I think setting a good, reasonable, and manageable milestone can help manage work expectations and can make for more exciting playtests, which in turn will give better feedback. Because the scope for Elysian Ascent was so massive, it just took way too long to actually reach the milestones that we had set out for the game, and because of that, it just felt like we were never actually making any progress on the game. And I think that's all I really wanted to say. I guess I'm sorry to anyone who's looking forward to the game, although you probably could have inferred where the direction of this game was headed just from my years of silence. But with that said, definitely stay tuned for the devlogs that I'm working on for the new game. I think it's already miles ahead of where Elysian Ascent was. And I've pretty much been working on it every day for almost the past 18 months now. I think it's super fun, and if you want to stay ahead of the curve, join my Discord, link in the description. I definitely give updates there a lot more frequently than I do on this channel, and you'll also be able to join in some playtests for the game well before it's already announced. But with that said, that about wraps up my post-mortem. Thanks for tuning in.